Senate confirmation hearing room was packed to capacity on that cold January morning in 2025. Howard Lutnik, the billionaire CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald and Trump's nominee for Commerce Secretary, sat at the witness table, his usual Wall Street confidence radiating from his perfectly tailored suit. For 3 hours, he had been answering questions about his business dealings, his plans for American commerce, and his loyalty to the Trump administration. Everything was going according to plan. Then Representative Jasmine Crockett from Texas walked into the room. What happened in the next 30 minutes would send shockwaves through Wall Street, leave Lutnik's confirmation hanging by a thread, and expose financial connections that nobody saw coming. The freshman congresswoman, known for her sharp tongue and fearless questioning, carried a manila folder that would change everything. As she took her seat and adjusted the microphone, Lutnik's expression shifted. Something about the way she looked at him, the slight smile playing at the corner of her mouth, made the billionaire's hands grip the edge of the table. "Mr. Lutnik," Crockett began, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd, "I have some questions about your company's activities that I think the American people deserve answers to. Before we dive into what happened next, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, because what you're about to witness is one of the most explosive congressional confrontations in recent history. To understand the magnitude of what was about to unfold, you need to know who these two people really are. Howard Lutnik isn't just any Wall Street executive. He's a survivor who rebuilt Cantor Fitzgerald after losing 658 employees, including his own brother, in the September 11 attack. For over 3 decades, he had navigated the treacherous waters of high finance, turning tragedy into triumph, building a financial empire worth billions. His company handles about 1/4 of all transactions in the massive U.S. Treasury market. When Trump nominated him for Commerce Secretary, Wall Street celebrated. Here was one of their own heading to Washington, someone who understood markets, someone who could bridge the gap between big business and the new administration. At 63 years old, Lutnik had faced congressional hearings before. He knew the game. He had prepared for weeks, his team of lawyers and advisors drilling him on every possible question. His confirmation seemed like a formality. The Republican majority in the Senate meant smooth sailing. Even some Democrats had signaled their support, impressed by his philanthropic work and his story of resilience after 9/11. But Jasmine Crockett was not your typical member of Congress. At 43, the Dallas native had earned her stripes as a civil rights attorney before entering politics. She had made a name for herself in the Texas House of Representatives as someone who didn't pull punches, who asked the uncomfortable questions others were afraid to ask. When she won her congressional seat, Washington insiders dismissed her as another progressive firebrand who would make noise but little impact. They underestimated her badly. Crockett had spent her legal career taking on powerful institutions. She understood financial crimes, she understood corporate malfeasance, and most importantly, she understood how to read between the lines of complex financial documents. While other members of Congress relied on staff to prepare their questions, Crockett did her own homework. She spent nights poring over SEC filings, analyzing trading patterns, connecting dots that others missed. For weeks before this hearing, she had been investigating something that caught her attention. A series of trades, a pattern of transactions, connections between Cantor Fitzgerald and offshore entities that didn't quite add up. Her staff had warned her to be careful, that taking on someone like Lutnik could backfire. But Crockett had built her career on taking calculated risks, on standing up to power when others wouldn't. The stakes couldn't be higher. For Lutnik, this confirmation meant the culmination of a lifetime in business, a chance to shape American commerce policy, to leave a legacy beyond Wall Street. For Crockett, this was about accountability, about ensuring that the people put in charge of America's economic future were worthy of that trust. But what neither of them knew was that this confrontation would expose something much bigger than either of them had anticipated. As Crockett opened her manila folder, the room seemed to hold its breath. Camera phones went up. C-SPAN zoomed in. The Wall Street Journal's reporter leaned forward. Something significant was about to happen. Crockett's first question seemed innocent enough. "Mr. Lutnik, can you tell us about Cantor Fitzgerald's trading volumes in Treasury securities during the third quarter of 2024? Lutnik relaxed slightly. This was familiar territory. Certainly, Representative. Our firm, as you may know, is one of the largest interdealer brokers in the Treasury market. In Q3 2024, we facilitated approximately $3 trillion in transactions, consistent with our historical averages. Consistent with historical averages, Crockett repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. That's interesting, Mr. Lutnik, because according to the data I have here, your trading volumes in specific Treasury instruments showed unusual spikes on very particular dates that coincided with major Federal Reserve announcements. The billionaire's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Representative, I can assure you that all our trading activities are completely legal and transparent. We operate under strict regulatory oversight. I'm not questioning the legality, Mr. Lutnik. Not yet. Crockett pulled out a document from her folder. I'm questioning the timing. And more importantly, I'm questioning who knew what and when they knew it. She held up a chart for the cameras to see. This shows your firm's trading patterns. Notice these spikes? They happen exactly 24 to 48 hours before major Fed policy announcements. Once or twice might be coincidence, but 17 times in 6 months? Murmurs rippled through the hearing room. Lutnik's lead attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but the CEO waved him off. His voice remained steady, but those watching closely could see a bead of sweat forming on his temple. Representative Crockett, market participants often adjust positions based on economic indicators and legitimate market analysis. There's nothing unusual about that. Legitimate market analysis, Crockett echoed. She pulled out another document. Mr. Lutnik, are you familiar with a company called Meridian Capital Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands? The color drained from Lutnik's face. For the first time since the hearing began, he hesitated. I'd need to check our records. We deal with many counterparties in the normal course of business. Let me refresh your memory, Crockett continued, her voice gaining momentum. Meridian Capital Holdings, established in March 2024, has been a consistent participant in the same Treasury trades that showed those unusual patterns. What's particularly interesting is that Meridian's trading account was opened just 2 weeks after you had a private dinner with several Federal Reserve board members. The lead Republican on the committee tried to interrupt. Representative Crockett, I must remind you that we're here to discuss Mr. Lutnik's qualifications for Commerce Secretary, not to conduct a fishing expedition. Crockett didn't even look at him. Her eyes remained locked on Lutnik. Senator, with all due respect, the American people deserve to know if their potential Commerce Secretary has been using insider information to manipulate the Treasury market. That goes directly to his qualifications. She pulled out a photograph. Mr. Lutnik, this photo was taken at the St. Regis Hotel in New York on March 15th, 2024. It shows you having dinner with 3 individuals. Can you identify them for the committee? Lutnik's hands were now visibly trembling as he reached for his water glass. The confidence that had carried him through 3 hours of questioning was evaporating. I attend many business dinners, Representative. I can't be expected to remember every one. Then let me help you, Crockett said, her voice now sharp as a blade. The man on your right is Jerome Patterson, a senior advisor at the Federal Reserve. The woman across from you is Linda Chen, who runs the Fed's market operations desk. And the third person? That's Michael Thornton, who just happens to be the managing director of Meridian Capital Holdings. Gasps echoed through the room. Reporters were frantically typing on their phones. The committee chairman was banging his gavel, calling for order, but the damage was done. The narrative had shifted completely. Lutnik's attorney stood up. Mr. Chairman, we request a brief recess to confer with our client. But Crockett wasn't finished. Before you take that recess, Mr. Lutnik, I have one more question. Can you explain why Meridian Capital Holdings transferred $47 million to a political action committee that supported your nomination just 3 days after your most profitable Treasury trade? The hearing room erupted. Senators were shouting over each other. Photographers were pushing forward to get better shots. Lutnik sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing without words coming out. His legendary composure, built over decades on Wall Street, had completely shattered. The chairman was banging his gavel repeatedly. Order! We will have order! Representative Crockett, you will provide documentation for these allegations immediately. Crockett calmly placed her entire folder on the desk. Everything is right here, Mr. Chairman. Side filings, bank records, emails obtained through FOIA requests. I have made copies for every member of the committee. As staffers scrambled to distribute the documents, Lutnik finally found his voice, though it cracked with stress. This is a complete mischaracterization. These are legitimate business relationships. Representative Crockett is trying to create a scandal where none exists. Then you should have no problem explaining these transactions under oath, Crockett responded coolly. Unless, of course, you'd like to invoke your Fifth Amendment rights. The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Everyone in the room understood the implications. If Lutnik took the Fifth, his nomination was dead. If he continued testifying, he risked perjury charges if Crockett had more evidence. Lutnik's lead attorney grabbed the microphone. Mr. Chairman, given these surprise allegations, we request a recess until tomorrow to review these documents and prepare a proper response. The chairman, looking deeply uncomfortable, nodded. The committee will recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Mr. Lutnik, you remain under oath. As the gavel came down, Lutnik slumped in his chair. The confident Wall Street titan who had entered the room 3 hours earlier was gone. In his place sat a man watching his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. Crockett gathered her papers slowly, deliberately, making sure the cameras caught every moment. She had done what she came to do, plant the seeds of doubt that would grow into a full scandal. The next morning, the hearing room was even more packed. Major news networks had sent their top correspondents. The story had exploded overnight, with hashtags like Lutnikgate and Crockett Expos trending globally. Financial markets were jittery, with Cantor Fitzgerald's partners reportedly holding emergency meetings through the night. Lutnik returned to the witness table looking haggard. His usual perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled, dark circles shadowed his eyes. His team of lawyers had expanded from 3 to 7. They knew this was no longer just about a confirmation hearing. This was about potential criminal liability. Crockett entered the room with the same calm confidence she had shown the day before. She had spent the night preparing, knowing that Lutnik's team would have crafted responses to her initial allegations, but she had kept her best evidence in reserve. The chairman called the hearing to order, his voice weary. Mr. Lutnik, you've had the opportunity to review the documents provided by Representative Crockett. Do you have a response? Lutnik leaned into the microphone, his voice steadier than the day before. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I want to categorically deny any wrongdoing. The documents Representative Crockett presented have been taken completely out of context. Yes, I know some Federal Reserve officials socially, that's not unusual for someone in my position. Yes, Meridian Capital is one of thousands of counterparties we work with, and yes, they made a political contribution, as is their First Amendment right. But there is absolutely no connection between these facts. He had clearly been coached overnight. His answers were careful, lawyerly, designed to create reasonable doubt. Several Republican senators nodded approvingly. For a moment, it seemed like he might weather the storm. Then Crockett spoke. Mr. Lutnik, I appreciate your response, but I'm afraid you've left me no choice but to share some additional information that came to light last night. The room tensed. Lutnik's knuckles went white as he gripped the table. You see, Crockett continued, after yesterday's hearing, I received a call from someone, a whistleblower from inside Cantor Fitzgerald. Someone with access to internal communications who was deeply troubled by what they had witnessed. Lutnik's lead attorney immediately objected. Mr. Chairman, this is highly irregular. We have no opportunity to verify the credibility of this alleged whistleblower. The chairman looked uncertain. Representative Crockett, do you have documentary evidence to support these claims? I do. She pulled out a tablet. These are internal emails from Cantor Fitzgerald's servers. I'll read one dated March 16, 2024, the day after the dinner I mentioned yesterday. It's from Mr. Lutnik to his head of trading. Quote, move everything to Meridian for the next Fed play. Patterson says it's going to be bigger than expected. Delete this after reading. End quote. The hearing room exploded. Reporters were shouting questions. Several senators were on their feet. Lutnik had gone pale as a ghost. That's fabricated, Lutnik shouted, his composure finally cracking completely. This is a setup. Those emails are fake. Crockett remained calm. Mr. Lutnik, these emails were provided with full metadata. They can be independently verified. But if you're saying they're fake, then you won't mind if the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit conducts a forensic examination of your servers? The trap was perfectly set. If Lutnik agreed to the examination, investigators would find the evidence. If he refused, it would look like an admission of guilt. Either way, he was finished. His lead attorney grabbed the microphone. "We need to confer with our client." But Crockett pressed on. "While you're conferring, let me share another email. This one is from Michael Thornton at Meridian to an unknown recipient. Quote, Howard says the Fed will move 50 basis points, not 25. Position accordingly. Our arrangement continues to be profitable for all parties." End quote. She looked directly at Lutnik. Her-headed and Mr. Lutnik, that Fed decision hadn't been made public yet. It wouldn't be announced for another 48 hours. How did you know? Lutnik was sweating profusely now. We make educated guesses based on economic indicators. Crockett guesses? Crockett pulled out another document. This is a trading record showing that Meridian Capital, using information that allegedly came from you, made $312 million on that single trade. That's quite an education, Mr. Lutnik. He turned to address the committee as a whole. Senators, what we're looking at here is potentially the largest insider trading scheme involving Federal Reserve information in history. We're talking about billions of dollars in profits made on information that should have been confidential, information that moved markets, information that gave unfair advantage to a select few at the expense of every other market participant. The senior Democrat on the committee finally spoke. Mr. Lutnik, in light of these extremely serious allegations, do you wish to continue with your nomination? Lutnik looked at his lawyers who were engaged in frantic, whispered consultation. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. Finally, Lutnik spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Chairman, I need to consult with counsel about how to proceed. But Crockett had one more card to play. Mr. Lutnik, before you make that decision, there's one more thing the committee should know. She pulled out a final document. This is a sworn affidavit from Jerome Patterson, the Federal Reserve advisor you dined with. He's agreed to cooperate fully with investigators in exchange for immunity. He's prepared to testify about the entire scheme. The knockout blow had been delivered. Lutnik slumped in his chair like a boxer who had just taken a devastating uppercut. His attorneys were standing now, creating a huddle around their client, but everyone in the room knew it was over. The committee chairman, looking deeply disturbed, spoke slowly. Mr. Lutnik, given the gravity of these allegations and the evidence presented, I'm going to suspend this hearing pending a full investigation by the appropriate authorities. I'm also referring this matter to the Justice Department and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Lutnik's lead attorney made one last attempt. Mr. Chairman, we strenuously object to this rush to judgment. My client deserves the opportunity to respond to these allegations in a proper forum. He'll have that opportunity, the chairman replied grimly, in federal court. As security officers moved to escort Lutnik from the room, he wasn't under arrest yet, but everyone knew that was coming. He turned to look at Crockett. For a moment, their eyes met. The billionaire who had walked into that room thinking he was untouchable had been brought down by a freshman congresswoman everyone had underestimated. Crockett spoke one last time, her voice carrying across the chaos of the room. Mr. Lutnik, you spent your career thinking you were too big to fail, too connected to face consequences. But today the American people showed that no one is above the law, not even a Wall Street billionaire. The cameras captured everything, Lutnik being led away, his legal team scrambling to follow, senators huddled in urgent discussion, and Jasmine Crockett calmly collecting her documents. The manila folder that had changed everything tucked under her arm. Within minutes of the hearing's dramatic suspension, the financial world went into chaos. Trading in Cantor Fitzgerald bonds was halted. The company's stock price, though it wasn't publicly traded, saw its valuation estimates slashed by analysts. CNBC broke into regular programming with a breaking news banner screaming across the screen. The first tweet came from a financial reporter who had been in the room. Witness history. Ref. Jasmine Crockett just destroyed Howard Lutnik's nomination and possibly his career in most devastating congressional takedown I've ever seen. Criminal charges likely. This is Enron-level massive. Within an hour, Crockett takedown was the top trending topic worldwide. Video clips of the key moments, Lutnik's stunned face when the emails were read, his stammering denials, the final revelation about the cooperating witness, were being shared millions of times. News networks were scrambling to book financial crime experts to explain the implications. On Wall Street, the reaction was immediate and brutal. Sources inside Cantor Fitzgerald reported that an emergency board meeting had been called. Partners were reportedly demanding Lutnik's immediate resignation. Clients were calling to pull their accounts. The firm that had survived 9/11 was facing an existential crisis. The political fallout was equally swift. The White House, which had stood firmly behind Lutnik's nomination just 24 hours earlier, released a terse statement: "The president has accepted Mr. Lutnik's withdrawal from consideration for Commerce Secretary. We expect all nominees to meet the highest ethical standards." But the story was far from over. Within 3 hours of the hearing's end, the FBI had executed search warrants at Cantor Fitzgerald's offices in New York. Agents were seen carrying boxes of documents and computer hard drives out of the building. The Southern District of New York, famous for its prosecution of financial crimes, announced it was opening a formal investigation. More whistleblowers began coming forward. A senior trader at Cantor Fitzgerald contacted the New York Times, offering to share recordings of internal meetings where the scheme was discussed. A former employee reached out to the Wall Street Journal with documents showing the conspiracy went back even further than Crockett had revealed. The house of cards was collapsing at breathtaking speed. Jerome Patterson, the Federal Reserve advisor who had agreed to cooperate, gave an exclusive interview to 60 Minutes that would air that Sunday. In leaked excerpts, he described a culture of corruption that had infected the highest levels of Wall Street and potentially parts of the Federal Reserve itself. "It started small," he was quoted as saying, "just friends sharing educated guesses. But it morphed into something monstrous, something that betrayed every principle of fair markets." The SEC announced it was expanding its investigation beyond just Cantor Fitzgerald. Every trade Meridian Capital had made was being scrutinized. Other financial firms that had participated in similar patterns were being subpoenaed. What had started as questions about one man's nomination was turning into the largest financial scandal in a generation. For Jasmine Crockett, the transformation was remarkable. The congresswoman who had entered that hearing room as a relatively unknown freshman representative was now being hailed as a hero. Messages of support flooded her office. Civil rights organizations praised her courage. Financial reform advocates called her a champion for market fairness. There was talk of her leading a new congressional committee on financial oversight. In an interview with CNN that evening, Crockett was characteristically direct. "This isn't about political parties or personal vendettas. This is about ensuring that our financial markets operate fairly, that inside information isn't used to enrich the few at the expense of the many. What we uncovered today is just the tip of the iceberg." When asked how she had discovered the scheme, she smiled slightly. "I did what any good lawyer does. I followed the money. And when you follow the money, it always tells a story. In this case, it told a story of greed, corruption, and betrayal of public trust." The interview went viral, with millions viewing it within hours. Crockett's Twitter followers increased by 500,000 in a single day. She was invited onto every major news program, offered book deals, approached about a documentary, but she declined most of them, saying she had work to do. Meanwhile, Howard Lutnik's fall from grace was complete. By that evening, he had resigned as CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, a position he had held for decades. His lawyers released a statement maintaining his innocence, but acknowledging the need for him to step aside, for the good of the firm and its employees. Behind the scenes, sources reported he was negotiating a cooperation agreement with prosecutors, hoping to avoid prison time. The reverberations extended beyond just the financial world. Other nominees for the administration were withdrawing their names from consideration, fearing similar scrutiny. Congress was already drafting new legislation to prevent Federal Reserve officials from having any contact with market participants. There were calls for a complete overhaul of how financial markets were regulated. On social media, the conversation was intense. Financial professionals debated whether this was an isolated incident or symptomatic of broader corruption. Some defended the practice of information networking as necessary for efficient markets. Others called for radical reform, even suggesting that all Federal Reserve deliberations should be public. Memes spread like wildfire. The image of Lutnik's shocked face when Crockett revealed the cooperating witness became the Lutnik face, used to express complete devastation. Videos were edited showing Crockett as a superhero taking down Wall Street villains. The Crockett Doctrine became shorthand for aggressive congressional oversight. Legal experts weighed in on the potential charges Lutnik and his co-conspirators might face. Insider trading, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit securities fraud. The list was long, and the potential sentences severe. One former prosecutor estimated that, if convicted on all likely charges, Lutnik could face 20 to 30 years in federal prison. The financial impact was staggering. Estimates suggested that the insider trading scheme had generated over $3 billion in illegal profits over 2 years. Every trade would have to be unwound, every profit clawed back. Lawsuits from disadvantaged traders were already being filed. Cantor Fitzgerald faced potential fines that could destroy the firm. 3 days after the hearing, the first arrests were made. Michael Thornton of Meridian Capital was taken into custody at JFK Airport as he tried to board a flight to Dubai. 2 senior executives at Cantor Fitzgerald were arrested at their homes. The perp walks, with the accused in handcuffs, being led into federal courthouses, dominated the news cycle. A week later, Jasmine Crockett held a press conference. Standing before a room packed with reporters, she announced that she was introducing legislation called the Market Integrity Act. The bill would create new criminal penalties for insider trading involving government information, require all meetings between regulators and market participants to be logged, and establish a new independent office to investigate financial crimes. What we discovered in that hearing room wasn't just criminal activity, she said. It was a betrayal of the fundamental premise of our financial system, that markets should be fair and transparent. This legislation will ensure that what happened with Mr. Lutnik can never happen again. The bill had bipartisan support, a rarity in the polarized Congress. Even senators who had initially supported Lutnik's nomination were now distancing themselves, praising Crockett's investigation. The political calculus was simple. No one wanted to be seen as soft on Wall Street corruption. As the criminal cases proceeded, more details emerged. The investigation revealed that the scheme had involved at least 12 major financial institutions and over 30 individuals. It wasn't just about Federal Reserve information. There was evidence of insider trading based on Treasury Department decisions, SEC enforcement actions, even congressional legislation. The corruption was systemic. Howard Lutnik, once one of the most powerful men on Wall Street, was indicted on 17 counts of securities fraud, conspiracy, and lying to federal investigators. His mugshot, a far cry from the confident corporate headshots that had adorned business magazines, became symbolic of Wall Street excess brought low. He pleaded not guilty, but few believed he could escape conviction, given the mountain of evidence Crockett had uncovered and the cooperating witnesses lining up to testify against him. The trials would take months, maybe years, but the verdict in the court of public opinion had already been rendered. Lutnik was guilty, Crockett was a hero, and the cozy relationship between Wall Street and Washington had been exposed for all to see. In a final ironic twist, the economic impact of the scandal led to calls for exactly the kind of financial reform that a legitimate Commerce Secretary might have opposed. Stricter regulations on trading, greater transparency in government economic decisions, more severe penalties for financial crimes all became politically popular in the wake of what was now being called the Lutnik scandal. For Jasmine Crockett, the freshman congresswoman who had walked into that hearing room with a manila folder and a determination to seek the truth, it was a transformative moment. She had shown that one person, armed with facts and unafraid of power, could bring down titans. Her subsequent book, Following the Money: How We Exposed Wall Street's Biggest Scandal, became an instant bestseller. But she remained focused on the work ahead. In a 60 Minutes interview 6 months after the hearing, she was asked what drove her to take on someone as powerful as Howard Lutnik. "It wasn't about taking him on," she replied. "It was about doing my job. The American people elected me to provide oversight, to ask the tough questions, to ensure that government works for them, not for the wealthy and connected. When I saw those trading patterns, when I connected those dots, I knew I had a responsibility to act." When asked if she was afraid of the potential backlash from Wall Street, she smiled. "Fear is a luxury we can't afford when democracy is at stake. Besides, what's the worst they could do? They already underestimated me once. I don't think they'll make that mistake again." The interview ended with the host asking what was next for the congresswoman who had become a household name. "The same thing that was always next," Crockett replied, "the work. There are more Howard Lutniks out there, more schemes, more corruption. My job is to find them and expose them. The American people deserve nothing less." As the camera pulled back, showing Crockett in her congressional office, the walls now lined with letters of support from constituents and framed headlines about the scandal she had exposed, one thing was clear: the balance of power between Wall Street and Washington had shifted, if only slightly. And it had shifted because one representative had the courage to ask the questions others wouldn't ask, to follow the evidence wherever it led, and to stand up to power when it mattered most. The financial markets eventually stabilized. Cantor Fitzgerald survived, though significantly weakened and under new management. New regulations were put in place to prevent similar schemes, but the real legacy of that January morning wasn't in the laws or the market reforms. It was in the message sent to every would-be corporate criminal: you are not untouchable. In the age of increased scrutiny and fearless legislators like Jasmine Crockett, even the mightiest could fall. Howard Lutnik's trial began 8 months after the hearing. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. As he was led away in shackles, financial news networks replayed the moment Crockett had first pulled out that manila folder, the moment everything changed. It became one of those defining images in American political history, the moment when David slew Goliath, when truth defeated power, when a freshman congresswoman brought down a Wall Street titan. But Jasmine Crockett was already on to the next case, the next investigation, the next corrupt official who thought they were above the law. Because as she had learned and as she had taught the nation, with enough determination, enough preparation, and enough courage, anyone could be held accountable, even a billionaire, even on Wall Street, even in America. If you